Who were the mysterious sons of God in Genesis chapter 6 who took wives from the daughters of men and produced the Nephilim? Was this an angelic invasion, a breeding program between demons and humans, or something entirely different? This passage has sparked centuries of debate, wild speculation in popular culture, and genuine confusion among Christians. Hollywood portrays these verses as cosmic horror, with fallen angels creating giant hybrid monsters. But the early church fathers understood something far more sobering and far more relevant to your life today. This wasn't about angels breaking cosmic boundaries. It was about God's holy people compromising with a godless culture, breaking down the spiritual boundaries that protected them, and unleashing judgment upon the world. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4 presents one of the most puzzling passages in all of Scripture. When you read that, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were fair, and they took wives for themselves of all that they chose, the text immediately raises questions. Who exactly were these sons of God? Why does Scripture distinguish them from the daughters of men? And what were the Nephilim, these fallen ones or mighty men born from these unions? The confusion isn't new. For centuries, believers have wrestled with this text, proposing three primary interpretations: the angelic view, which sees the sons of God as fallen angels, the royal view, which identifies them as human kings, and the Sethite view, which the Catholic Church has historically embraced. The stakes of getting this right are higher than mere academic curiosity. If we misread Genesis chapter 6, we miss a crucial warning about the danger of God's people marrying outside the faith and compromising with corrupt culture. We risk turning Scripture into mythology when it's actually delivering a historical and moral lesson. Worse, we might overlook how this passage connects to the flood narrative and God's judgment on sin. This isn't about sensational stories of angel-human hybrids. It's about covenant faithfulness and the catastrophic consequences when God's children abandon their calling. The choice these ancient sons of God made led directly to the flood that destroyed the world. Understanding their identity helps us understand our own vulnerabilities today. If you're interested in deepening your faith, hit like and tell me where you're watching from. Consider subscribing to stay rooted in Catholic truth. Support our videos, team, and tools. Link in description or scan the QR code on screen. The phrase "sons of God" appears elsewhere in the Old Testament, and context matters immensely. In the book of Job chapters 1 and 2, sons of God refers to angelic beings who present themselves before the Lord. In Psalm 89 verse 6, the term describes heavenly creatures. This has led some to conclude that Genesis chapter 6 must refer to angels. However, Scripture also uses son as a covenant category, not merely a biological one. In the book of Exodus, chapter 4 verse 22, God calls Israel "my firstborn son." In Psalm 2 verse 7, the Davidic king is declared God's son. In the Gospel of Luke chapter 3 verse 38, Adam himself is called the Son of God. The pattern reveals that sons of God often designates those in covenant relationship with God, those chosen to bear his image and represent him on earth. The early church fathers recognized this covenant framework when interpreting Genesis chapter 6. The most common patristic interpretation identified the sons of God as descendants of Seth, Adam's third son, through whom the righteous line continued after Abel's murder. Seth's line is distinguished in Genesis chapter 4 verse 26, where people began to call upon the name of the Lord. In contrast, the daughters of men were understood to be descendants of Cain, who went away from the presence of the Lord, according to Genesis chapter 4 verse 16. Saint Irenaeus, while acknowledging that some early fathers held the angelic view, represents the developing tradition that saw this as intermarriage between the godly and ungodly lines of humanity. The Sethite interpretation became the dominant Catholic view precisely because it fits the narrative context of Genesis chapters 4 through 6, which traces two genealogies, one righteous, one wicked, converging in catastrophic compromise. The Catechism of the Catholic Church recognizes that angels are called sons of God in some contexts, but the Genesis 6 passage concerns humanity's sin and God's judgment on man, not angels. This interpretation preserves the moral lesson: when God's people intermarry with those who reject him, spiritual corruption follows. The Catholic understanding of Genesis chapter 6 reveals a sobering pattern that repeats throughout salvation history. The sons of God, Seth's descendants, who maintained worship of the true God, saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and married them based on physical attraction rather than spiritual compatibility. This wasn't simply romance, it was covenant betrayal. These men abandoned the principle that would later be codified in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 3 through 4, warning Israel not to intermarry with pagan nations because they will turn away your children from following me. The consequence wasn't immediate divine thunderbolts, but something far more insidious: the corruption of the entire earth. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 tells us, "The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." The holy line compromised, lost its witness, and the world descended into depravity that necessitated the flood. This passage teaches us three essential truths. First, holiness requires separation, not isolation from the world, but maintaining distinct identity as God's people. Second, marriage is a spiritual union, not merely physical or emotional, and choosing a spouse who shares your faith protects both you and your children. Third, compromise with godless culture doesn't happen dramatically but gradually, through seemingly innocent choices that erode spiritual foundations. The Nephilim, or fallen ones, weren't supernatural monsters, but the fruit of this compromise, a generation that abandoned God entirely. When the church fathers called them fallen, they meant spiritually fallen, cut off from the covenant promises that had marked Seth's line. Today, Catholics face identical pressures: marrying outside the faith for attraction or convenience, absorbing secular values, and gradually losing distinctive Christian identity. Genesis chapter 6 stands as a perpetual warning. Some object that this interpretation seems too mundane, that sons of God must mean angels because the phrase appears that way in Job. However, Scripture uses the same phrase differently in different contexts, and Genesis chapter 6 focuses entirely on human sin and divine judgment on humanity, never mentioning angelic punishment. The flood was sent because of man's wickedness, not because of angelic transgression. Others point to the book of 1 Peter, chapter 3, verses 19 through 20, and the book of Jude, verses 6 through 7, as evidence of angelic sin, but neither passage explicitly connects to Genesis chapter 6, and both can be understood in light of different Old Testament events. The Protestant reformer John Calvin strongly rejected the angelic interpretation, calling it an ancient figment that was abundantly refuted by its own absurdity, noting that learned church fathers had moved beyond it. The Catholic tradition followed this trajectory, recognizing that the Sethite view honors both the narrative context and the moral theology of Scripture. While respecting that some early fathers held different views, the Church came to understand that this passage teaches covenant faithfulness rather than cosmic mythology. The sons of God in Genesis chapter 6 were the descendants of Seth, who compromised their covenant identity by marrying into Cain's ungodly line, producing a generation so corrupted that God sent the flood. This interpretation, embraced by the Catholic Church and early church fathers, reveals a timeless truth. Spiritual compromise begins with seemingly small choices and ends in catastrophic judgment. Your takeaway today is threefold. First, recognize that your identity as a son or daughter of God through baptism requires maintaining spiritual distinctiveness in an increasingly secular culture. Second, if you're discerning marriage, choose a spouse who shares your Catholic faith and will help you raise children in the Lord. Third, examine your life for areas where you've compromised with worldly values and return to covenant faithfulness through confession and renewed commitment. If this helped you, share it with a friend, subscribe, and check out our web app for daily Catholic resources and soul search. The sons of God fell when they chose beauty over holiness. Choose Christ over culture, and you'll stand when judgment comes.